You're about to enter the Apex Metaphysics Manual, where forbidden 33rd degree wisdom exposes the secret every mystic knew. Fate is not written, it's edited. As you listen, you'll awaken to the truth that your inner state reshapes reality itself. This is the knowledge that rewrites your fate forever. The Apex Metaphysics Manual. You didn't arrive here by accident. Certain pages find certain souls. If this book found you, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. I'm giving away a free physical copy of this book, packed with ancient wisdom and timeless insight. The details are in the pinned comment, so don't forget to check it out. Introduction. Here's a draft that follows the instructions closely. The editing principle emerges as a transformative revelation, a cosmic understanding that transcends traditional manifestation teachings. Your consciousness is not a passive receiver, but an active generator of reality. Every thought, assumption, and emotional resonance functions as a fundamental instruction to the universal intelligence that surrounds and permeates your existence. Imagine your inner landscape as a living manuscript, where each belief becomes a line of spiritual code that directly interfaces with the quantum field. Your emotional frequencies are not mere reactions, but powerful editing tools that continuously rewrite the script of your lived experience. You are not merely observing reality. You are perpetually authoring it. This principle challenges the conventional narrative of fate as a predetermined trajectory. Instead, reality becomes a dynamic, responsive field that constantly recalibrates according to the subtle energetic instructions you transmit through your deepest beliefs and emotional states. Your identity is not fixed, but a malleable construct that you can consciously redesign. The universe operates as an intelligent, adaptive system, a responsive membrane that reshapes itself according to the vibrational signatures you emit. Your inner world is the primary creative interface, the sacred ground where transformation begins. Every assumption becomes an energetic blueprint, every emotional tone a directive that ripples through the quantum fabric of existence. By embracing the editing principle, you step into a radical understanding. Life is not happening to you, but fundamentally happening from you. You are not a victim of circumstances, but the conscious architect of your experiential reality, wielding the most profound creative power imaginable, the ability to rewrite the very script of your existence. Part 1. Awakening to the editable script. Chapter 1. The Night You Question. Destiny. The universe seemed to whisper its secrets through Eleanor Whitfield's trembling hands. For years, she had lived a carefully contracted life, her movements dictated by an intricate web of fears that she mistook for inevitable destiny. On a crisp autumn morning, Eleanor's long-standing terror of professional failure manifested precisely as she had always imagined, a critical presentation derailed by her own paralyzing anxiety. Walter Hensley understood transformation differently. Where Eleanor saw fate, he recognized the subtle architecture of consciousness. That morning, a barely perceptible internal recalibration transformed his entire experience. What had traditionally been a stressful work environment became a landscape of unexpected opportunities, simply because Walter had shifted his internal narrative. Eleanor's parable revealed a profound truth. Her fear was not a prediction, but a creative force actively constructing her reality. Each anxious thought had been a precise instruction to the universal intelligence, meticulously arranging circumstances to match her deepest expectations. The presentation she had dreaded became a self-fulfilling prophecy, sculpted by her own emotional frequency. Walter's experience demonstrated how microscopic internal shifts generate massive external transformations. by subtly adjusting his internal dialogue, moving from resistance to acceptance, from anxiety to curiosity. He rewrote the energetic blueprint of his day. The workplace that once felt restrictive now pulsed with potential, its very fabric responsive to his transformed perception. These parallel narratives illuminated the editing principle's core teaching. Consciousness precedes and generates experience. Each individual operates as a living manuscript, continuously drafting and redrafting reality through invisible inner movements. Practice. Reflect on one moment where inner emotion preceded outer experience. Close your eyes and trace the intricate connection between your internal state and an external outcome. When did your fear, expectation, or belief seemingly predict an event? Recognize this not as fate, but as your own creative power in action. What emotional tone were you broadcasting in that moment? How might a subtle internal shift have generated a different external result? Sit with this reflection. Do not judge, but observe. You are not uncovering a limitation, but recognizing your profound generative capacity. Chapter 2. The Great Mind and the Cosmic Script. Clara Thompson's life unfolded like a persistent echo of her inner landscape. She had noticed a peculiar pattern: relationships that consistently crumbled, professional opportunities that mysteriously dissolved, and personal challenges that seemed to replay with remarkable precision. What Clara didn't yet understand was that these recurring scenarios were not random accidents, but precise reflections of her deepest internal assumptions. Her belief in inevitable disappointment acted as an invisible architect, constructing circumstances that validated her core narrative. Each failed connection, each professional setback, emerged not as external misfortune, but as a direct translation of her inner emotional blueprint. The universe, functioning as a single, great mind, was meticulously rendering her internal state into observable reality. Edwin Mercer approached life differently. He understood that inner alignment was not a passive state, but an active conversation with the cosmic intelligence. Where others saw coincidence, Edwin recognized deliberate synchronicity. By carefully cultivating his internal narrative, he discovered that the external world responded with remarkable responsiveness. During a critical career transition, Edwin committed to a radical internal recalibration. Instead of approaching his professional shift with anxiety and uncertainty, he held a steady inner vision of possibility, abundance, and purpose. Remarkably, opportunities began materializing with stunning precision. Unexpected connections emerged, resources appeared seemingly out of nowhere, and pathways previously invisible suddenly crystallized. Clara and Edwin represented two different modes of engagement with the great mind. Clara's experiences demonstrated how unconscious assumptions generate repetitive scenarios, while Edwin illustrated the transformative potential of intentional inner alignment. Their parallel journeys revealed a fundamental truth. Consciousness is not merely a passive observer, but an active creator of lived experience. The universe operated not as a mechanical system, but as an intelligent, responsive field, constantly translating inner states into external manifestations. Every belief, every emotional frequency, every subtle assumption became an instruction, a line of code that the great mind diligently interpreted and rendered into physical experience. Practice. Notice one way the outer world mirrors your dominant state. Observe your current life circumstances without judgment. What recurring patterns can you identify? What might these patterns reveal about your underlying beliefs and emotional frequencies? Sit with this observation, recognizing that your external reality is not happening to you, but is being generated through you. Chapter 3. The Law That Listens. Martha Caldwell had always considered herself a victim of circumstance. Her life seemed to unfold like a predetermined script, with disappointment as its recurring theme. Despite her desperate desires for success and love, her underlying assumptions consistently undermined her most heartfelt intentions. In her professional life, Martha unconsciously believed that opportunities were scarce, and competition was fierce. She would prepare meticulously for interviews, her conscious mind filled with hope, but her deeper assumptions whispered of inevitable rejection. Predictably, her job searches resulted in repeated failures, each rejection seeming to confirm her unspoken belief that success was reserved for others. Her romantic life mirrored this pattern with devastating precision. Martha longed for a meaningful relationship, yet her core assumption about love remained rooted in scarcity and unworthiness. She believed, at a fundamental level, that genuine connection was not meant for her. The universe, responding to this deeper narrative, orchestrated scenarios that validated her assumption. Potential partners would drift away. Connections would remain superficial. Harold Benton represented a different approach to life's unfolding. He understood that external circumstances were not fixed, but malleable interpretations shaped by internal meaning. Where Martha saw obstacles, Harold saw opportunities for transformation. During a challenging period of financial uncertainty, Harold recognized that his previous interpretations of scarcity were themselves creating limitations. Instead of perceiving economic challenges as threats, he began to view them as invitations for creative problem-solving and personal growth. Harold's shift was not merely positive thinking, but a profound recalibration of his internal narrative. He began to see financial challenges as temporary conditions, not immutable truths. His assumptions about abundance, opportunity, and personal potential began to reshape his external reality. The universal principle became clear. Assumptions are not passive background thoughts, but active commands that the cosmic intelligence interprets and manifests. Every belief carried a vibrational frequency that communicated directly with the responsive field of potential. Martha and Harold's experiences illuminated a critical metaphysical teaching. Your assumptions are more powerful than your desires. While desires represent conscious wishes, assumptions represent deeper, often unconscious beliefs that truly guide manifestation. The universe does not distinguish between what you consciously want and what you fundamentally believe. It responds to the deeper, more persistent narrative, the assumptions you accept as true without question. Practice. Select and rewrite one limiting assumption. Chapter 4. Beliefs as Code in the Matrix of Reality. Ruth Ellington's romantic history read like a repetitive screenplay, each relationship following an eerily similar trajectory. At 42, she had unconsciously cultivated a belief system about partnership that acted as an invisible blueprint for her interactions. Her pattern began predictably. She would meet a charismatic man who initially seemed different, promising excitement and genuine connection. Within months, however, the relationship would deteriorate into a familiar landscape of emotional unavailability, subtle manipulation, and eventual abandonment. Ruth would find herself wondering how she had once again attracted a partner who mirrored her deepest, unspoken fears about love. Unbeknownst to Ruth, her core belief about relationships functioned like a metaphysical algorithm. She fundamentally believed that genuine intimacy was dangerous, that vulnerability would inevitably lead to rejection. This unconscious code was not merely a thought, but an active instruction set that the universe diligently executed. Each relationship became a precise manifestation of her internal programming. The men she attracted were not random selections, but carefully curated expressions of her deepest relational beliefs. They were actors playing out a script she had unknowingly written in the depths of her consciousness. Across town, Joseph Randall discovered a different approach to these invisible belief patterns. At 55, he recognized how a singular belief had constructed decades of professional and personal experiences. His core assumption that success requires struggle had transformed every opportunity into a complex, challenging journey. Joseph's revelation came not through grand epiphany, but through subtle observation. He noticed how consistently his belief about struggle manifested in career challenges, personal projects, and even simple daily tasks. Each experience seemed to confirm his fundamental assumption, creating a self-reinforcing loop of complexity and resistance. By making a microscopic adjustment to his belief, reframing success requires struggle to success flows through aligned effort, Joseph experienced a remarkable transformation. Opportunities began appearing with unexpected ease. Professional collaborations became more harmonious. His energy shifted from constant resistance to receptive engagement. Ruth and Joseph's experiences illuminated a profound metaphysical principle. Beliefs are not passive observations about reality, but active generating codes that shape experience. Like sophisticated computer programs, these belief structures continuously run in the background, interpreting incoming data and producing corresponding external manifestations. The universe operates as an immense responsive intelligence, perpetually translating internal narratives into observable experiences. Every belief carries a vibrational frequency that communicates with the field of potential, instructing how reality should be constructed. Practice. Identify one belief acting as code and rewrite it. Chapter 5. The Self-Concept. Lillian Hayes stood at the threshold of her art gallery, surrounded by canvases that whispered stories of transformation. For years, she had positioned herself as a struggling artist, a narrative that had become her invisible prison. Her self-concept was a carefully constructed limitation, a belief that genuine success remained perpetually out of reach. The turning point emerged not through dramatic revelation, but through a subtle internal shift. Lillian began to observe how her identity as a struggling artist methodically filtered her experiences. Opportunities passed her by, not by chance, but by the precise mechanism of her own self-perception. When she first encountered the principle of identity as the ultimate edit, Lillian resisted. The idea that her world was a direct reflection of her internal narrative seemed too simple, too profound to be true. Yet as she watched her patterns, she recognized the intricate dance between her self-concept and her external reality. Across the city, Franklin Hart experienced a similar awakening. A mid-level manager who had long considered himself unremarkable, Franklin discovered that his identity was the primary architect of his circumstances. Where he once saw closed doors, he now recognized that his perception of self was the very mechanism determining what opportunities could enter his life. Franklin's transformation began with a radical acceptance. He was not destined to remain average. By consciously choosing to see himself as a strategic, innovative professional, he watched his external world recalibrate. Promotions that once seemed impossible now appeared effortlessly. Networking conversations that previously felt intimidating now flowed with natural confidence. Both Lillian and Franklin were experiencing the same fundamental principle. Identity is not a passive description, but an active selection mechanism. Their worlds were not happening to them. Their worlds were happening from them, meticulously arranged around the frequency of their self-concept. The universe operates as a responsive intelligence, continuously translating internal narratives into observable experiences. Every subtle shift in self-perception sends ripples through the quantum field, reorganizing possibilities and potential. Lillian's artwork began to reflect her emerging identity. Her canvases transformed from tentative expressions of uncertainty to bold declarations of creative power. Galleries that once seemed inaccessible now sought her work, not through external manipulation, but through the pure resonance of her shifted self-perception. Franklin's professional landscape similarly metamorphosed. Colleagues who once overlooked him now sought his insights. Leadership opportunities emerged not through external recommendation, but through the magnetic pull of his recalibrated identity. Practice. Define traits of your chosen identity. Chapter 6. Time is Clay. In the quiet suburb of Oak Ridge, Janetta Moore discovered an extraordinary truth about the malleability of time and memory. For years, she had carried the weight of a painful childhood narrative, a story of perceived inadequacy and rejection that had silently governed her adult experiences. One ordinary Tuesday afternoon, something remarkable happened. As Janetta sat reviewing her life's trajectory, she realized that her current self-perception held the power to rewrite her understanding of past events. The memories that once felt like immutable facts began to shift, revealing themselves as fluid interpretations rather than concrete truths. Memories of her parents' criticism transformed. Where she once remembered only harsh judgment, she now recalled underlying love and imperfect attempts at guidance. The emotional charge of those memories softened, revealing a more nuanced understanding of her family's dynamics. Simultaneously, across town, Samuel Price confronted his own narrative of failure. A decade earlier, a business venture had collapsed dramatically, leaving him convinced of his fundamental inadequacy. But as he applied the principles of metaphysical editing, Samuel recognized that his past was not a fixed sentence, but a draft waiting to be revised. He began to reframe the business failure not as a definitive statement of his worth, but as a crucial learning experience. The memory transformed from a source of shame to a pivotal moment of growth and resilience. Each time Samuel revisited the memory, he did so with increasing detachment, seeing the event as a neutral experience that had ultimately prepared him for future success. Both Janetta and Samuel were experiencing a profound revelation. Time is not a linear progression of unchangeable events, but a responsive field shaped by present consciousness. Their current identity was actively rewriting their perception of past experiences, demonstrating that memory is not a recording, but a creative act of interpretation. The universe listened and responded to their internal shifts. As they changed their relationship to past experiences, new opportunities emerged. Janetta found herself more confident in her personal relationships. Samuel noticed unexpected professional connections materializing. Their experiences highlighted a critical teaching. The present moment is the point of power. By changing how they viewed their history, they were simultaneously altering their future potential. The past was not something that happened to them, but a narrative they could consciously edit. Practice. Revise one small memory to align with your chosen identity. Chapter 7. Emotional Alchemy. Virginia. Clark stood at the crossroads of her own emotional landscape. a terrain once dominated by a dense forest of resentment that had grown thick and suffocating over years of perceived injustice. Her life had been a slow burn of unresolved anger toward her family, her career setbacks, the universe itself. Each grievance was a root system that had anchored her to a narrative of victimhood. The transformation began subtly. During a quiet afternoon of reflection, Virginia realized her resentment was not a punishment inflicted upon her, but a frequency she was continuously broadcasting. Her emotional state was not a response to life, but a creator of it. Each moment of bitterness was like a signal sent into the universe, attracting circumstances that would validate her pain. With profound deliberation, she began to alchemize her emotional state. Resentment was not something to fight, but to understand, to transmute. She saw her anger as raw, unrefined energy waiting to be transformed into clarity, into purpose. Across town, Leonard Briggs was experiencing a similar metamorphosis. Years of professional frustration had accumulated like sediment in his spirit. Where others might have surrendered to resignation, Leonard chose to channel his anger into a laser-focused determination. His anger became fuel. The same energy that once consumed him with bitterness now propelled him forward. Leonard understood that emotions were not fixed states, but malleable energies that could be redirected. His professional landscape began to shift. Opportunities emerged, connections crystallized. Success followed the precise trajectory of his transformed emotional frequency. Virginia and Leonard represented living examples of a profound metaphysical principle. Emotions are not just internal experiences, but powerful communication systems with the universe. They are not happening to a person, but are actively creating that person's reality. Their journeys illustrated that emotional alchemy is not about suppressing or denying feelings, but about understanding their inherent creative potential. Anger could become determination. Resentment could transform into clarity. Grief could metamorphose into compassion. The universe responded to their internal shifts with remarkable precision. As they changed their emotional frequencies, external circumstances began to realign, reflecting their newfound internal states. Practice: transmute one emotion into a higher state. Chapter 8. Desire as Divine Instruction. Annabelle Rhodes stood at the window of her modest apartment, watching the city pulse beneath her. For years, her desires had been whispers she'd learned to silence. Practical considerations and societal expectations had muffled the subtle language of her inner longing. Her childhood dream of becoming a marine biologist had been systematically dismantled by well-meaning family members who spoke of stability, of predictable careers, of safe paths. She had listened, and in listening, had slowly disconnected from the most profound communication system available to her: her own desire. But something was shifting. Annabelle was beginning to understand that desire was not a wild, irresponsible impulse, but a precise navigation system. Her deepest wants were not random fantasies, but signals from her higher self, breadcrumbs leading toward her most authentic timeline. Across town, Thomas Avery was experiencing a similar awakening. He had spent decades resisting the quiet call to become a documentary filmmaker, convincing himself that such a path was too uncertain, too risky. His corporate job felt like a well-tailored prison, each spreadsheet and meeting a bar in the cell of compromise. Thomas realized that his resistance to desire was actually a resistance to himself. Every time he suppressed his true calling, he was sending a signal to the universe that he did not trust his own guidance system. His desires were not temptations to be feared, but invitations to be honored. When Thomas finally allowed himself to truly feel the pull toward filmmaking, something extraordinary happened. Connections emerged unexpectedly. A mentor appeared. A small grant materialized. Opportunities that had always existed suddenly became visible, as if his internal alignment had been the missing frequency needed to tune into them. Annabelle and Thomas represented a profound truth. Desire is not a random emotional state, but intelligent guidance. It is the higher self communicating through the language of longing, offering precise directions toward one's most expansive potential. Their journeys illuminated a radical understanding. Desires are not accidents or weaknesses. They are sophisticated communication channels, transmitting information about possible futures and unexplored capacities. By listening, truly listening to desire, individuals could align with their most authentic trajectories. The universe, they discovered, was not indifferent to their hopes. It was responsive, waiting for the moment of genuine internal commitment. Desire was not just a feeling, but a form of spiritual intelligence, a compass pointing toward unexplored territories of potential. Practice. Choose one desire to honor today. Chapter 9. The Inner Temple of Imagination. In the quiet suburb of Millbrook, Dorothy Langley discovered something extraordinary about the invisible landscape of possibility. Her life had always been predictable. A high school mathematics teacher, with carefully structured days and modest expectations. But everything changed when she began to understand the profound connection between her inner visualizations and external reality. It started subtly. Dorothy would imagine a parking spot opening up precisely when she needed it, and moments later, a car would pull away. She'd picture a colleague offering help with a complex lesson plan, and within hours, that exact scenario would unfold. These weren't mere coincidences, she realized, but demonstrations of a deeper metaphysical principle. One crisp autumn morning, Dorothy decided to experiment. She began spending 15 minutes each day creating rich, detailed mental scenes of her desired experiences. She didn't just passively daydream, but actively constructed vivid inner landscapes with emotional depth and sensory precision. Across town, Milton Hughes was experiencing similar revelations. A struggling entrepreneur, Milton had long battled financial uncertainty. When he learned about the power of imagination, he started crafting intricate mental movies of success, feeling the texture of important documents, hearing congratulatory conversations, experiencing the emotional resonance of achievement. Weeks passed. Dorothy's imaginal practices became more intentional. She learned that imagination wasn't about wishful thinking, but about creating internal experiences so real that the external world had no choice but to conform. Her mental scenes became blueprints, not fantasies. Milton's approach transformed his business. Opportunities he couldn't have predicted began emerging. Connections materialized. Investments he'd long dreamed about suddenly became accessible. The universal principle became clear. Imagination is the sacred creative chamber where potential becomes probability. It's not about forcing outcomes, but aligning with potential realities so precisely that manifestation becomes inevitable. Practice. Create a short imaginal ritual. Find a quiet space and spend 10-15 minutes constructing a detailed mental scene of a desired experience. Engage all your senses. Feel the emotional state as if the experience is happening now. Breathe into the visualization, making it viscerally real. Chapter 10. Surrender and the Silence. Between edits. In the rolling hills of Vermont, Estelle Warren's life had always been a careful orchestration of control. A successful marketing executive, she meticulously planned every aspect of her existence, constantly searching for signs, monitoring every potential indicator of her desire's manifestation. Her office walls were covered with vision boards, her journals filled with detailed tracking of potential synchronicities, each moment scrutinized for hidden meaning. The universe, however, had a different lesson planned for her. During a particularly stressful quarter, Estelle's relentless monitoring began to feel exhausting. Her constant checking, scanning emails, analyzing conversations, dissecting every interaction for potential meaning, was actually creating resistance to the very outcomes she desired. A chance conversation with an old mentor shifted her perspective. Manifestation isn't about constant surveillance, he told her. It's about creating and then trusting. Across town, Raymond Cole was experiencing a similar journey. An architect with grand dreams of launching his own firm, Raymond had spent years pushing, strategizing, and desperately trying to force opportunities into existence. His vision board was a testament to effort. Meticulously crafted images of successful projects, architectural magazines featuring his name, sketches of dream buildings. Yet nothing manifested. The turning point came when Raymond simply stopped, not in defeat, but in a profound understanding of surrender. He completed his work with excellence, held his vision clearly, but released the desperate grip of expectation. His energy shifted from frantic manipulation to calm confidence. For Estelle, surrender meant something similar. She continued her visualization practices, but stopped the constant checking. She created her mental scenes with precision, then stepped back. Her work remained excellent, her intentions clear, but she removed the anxious energy of constant verification. Weeks passed. Raymond received an unexpected call from a former colleague, an opportunity that aligned perfectly with his vision, arriving without his desperate pursuit. Estelle found her marketing campaign gaining unprecedented traction, clients appearing through networks she hadn't explicitly cultivated. The universal principle became clear. Manifestation requires both precise inner work and the courage to let go. Surrender isn't passive resignation, but an active trust in the creative process. By releasing the need to control every detail, they allowed their carefully crafted inner edits to lock into reality. Their experiences revealed a profound truth. Metaphysical authorship isn't just about writing the script, but also about trusting the performance. Practice. 5 minutes of intentional stillness. Find a quiet space. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes. Breathe deeply. Release all effort of trying to make something happen. Simply exist in complete, peaceful allowance. Part 2. Rewriting the lines of your destiny. Chapter 11. Choice Points. In the soft light of a Wednesday morning, Marjorie Whitman stood at her kitchen window, a half-empty coffee mug forgotten on the counter. Something felt different, not externally, but in the quiet landscape of her inner world. For years, Marjorie had lived a life of careful predictability, her choices dictated by a deep-seated belief that safety meant staying small, staying unnoticed. This morning was different. The decision wasn't dramatic or loud. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, a quiet acknowledgement that her current narrative no longer fit. Marjorie had always seen herself as someone who couldn't take risks, who wasn't meant for extraordinary experiences. But in this moment, that story began to crack. Across town, Henry Lockridge was experiencing a similar transformation. An accountant with a reputation for methodical thinking, Henry had long held a core assumption about his professional potential. "I'm good at following rules," he'd always told himself, "but not meant to lead." This single belief had been the invisible fence constraining his professional trajectory. One morning, during a routine team meeting, Henry caught himself challenging an established procedure. The thought itself was surprising. Not the challenge, but his willingness to voice it. His assumption about his own capabilities was shifting, almost imperceptibly. For Marjorie, the shift manifested quickly. A casual conversation with a neighbor led to an unexpected freelance opportunity. Her photography, something she'd always considered a private hobby, suddenly became a potential career path. The world didn't change. Her perception of what was possible did. Henry's transformation was equally profound. The small challenge in the meeting caught his manager's attention. Within weeks, he was invited to lead a critical project redesign. The synchronicities seemed to cascade from that single moment of internal recalibration. Their experiences illuminated a fundamental truth about human potential. Destiny isn't a predetermined path, but a continually negotiated landscape. Every moment contains choice points, invisible crossroads where internal narratives can be rewritten. These shifts aren't always dramatic. Sometimes they're as quiet as a whispered possibility. The universal principle became clear. Consciousness is the true creator of experience. When internal assumptions change, external reality begins to realign. Not through force, but through a subtle recalibration of perception. Practice. Identify a current choice point and reselect consciously. Take a moment to examine an area of your life where you feel stuck or limited. What underlying assumption are you carrying? How might you reframe that assumption to create a different potential? Write down one new possibility that emerges when you shift your perspective. Chapter 12. Parallel Timelines. The cafe's ambient noise faded as Evelyn Parrish closed her eyes, experiencing something beyond ordinary perception. She wasn't simply imagining alternate lives. She was sensing them, like overlapping transparent films of potential existence. In one timeline, Evelyn saw herself as a cautious corporate accountant, meticulously tracking numbers, living a life of predictable comfort. Another version radiated with creative energy, an artist traveling globally, her paintings capturing landscapes, from Barcelona to Bali. Yet another timeline showed her as a dedicated nonprofit leader, working in remote communities. These weren't fantasies. They were living, breathing potentialities, each as real as the moment she currently occupied. Evelyn understood that timelines weren't random accidents, but deliberate selections made through her internal state and identity. Across town, Arthur Whitcomb was experiencing a similar metaphysical recalibration. For years, he had moved through life apologetically, his posture suggesting perpetual uncertainty. His career in middle management reflected this internal hesitation, always following, never leading. Something shifted during a routine project presentation. Arthur unexpectedly straightened his spine, spoke with unwavering clarity, and proposed a radical strategy that surprised even himself. The room's energy changed. Colleagues who typically overlooked him now listened intently. What Arthur recognized in that moment was profound. His external circumstances were direct reflections of his internal stance. Confidence wasn't something to be earned. It was a state to be embodied first. Evelyn's insight and Arthur's transformation revealed a universal principle. Parallel timelines aren't discovered, they're selected. Each potential life exists simultaneously, waiting to be activated through consciousness, feeling, and identity. The great mind, that intelligent, responsive field, doesn't judge which timeline is better. It simply materializes the reality most aligned with one's dominant internal frequency. Timelines are like radio stations, and consciousness is the tuner. For Evelyn and Arthur, this meant recognizing they were not victims of circumstance, but active architects of their experience. Every feeling, every assumption, every subtle inner posture was a selection mechanism for reality. Practice. Pick a timeline and adopt its inner posture. Close your eyes and imagine a version of your life that represents your most expansive potential. What does that version of you feel like? How do they stand, speak, move through the world? Embody that inner stance completely, allowing it to permeate your current moment. Chapter 13. Identity Shifting. Lucille. Morgan stood at the threshold of transformation, her reflection in the hallway mirror revealing more than just her physical appearance. For years, she had been a careful curator of others' expectations, a dutiful daughter, a supportive colleague, a woman who prioritized everyone's needs before her own. But something fundamental was shifting beneath the surface. The change began quietly, almost imperceptibly. Lucille started speaking differently, her voice carrying a newfound resonance of self-assurance. Her movements became deliberate, each step infused with an internal certainty that hadn't existed before. She wasn't trying to become someone new. She was remembering who she had always been beneath layers of compromise. At work, her colleagues noticed first. The same projects that once seemed overwhelming now flowed through her with remarkable ease. Opportunities she had previously overlooked began presenting themselves, as if the external world was recalibrating to match her internal reconfiguration. Across town, Silas Harding experienced a different manifestation of the same principle. His transformation was primarily internal, a deep identity shift that occurred entirely within his consciousness. Unlike those who believed change required constant external action, Silas understood that true metamorphosis happens at the level of being. He had spent months cultivating an internal image of himself as someone successful, confident, and deeply purposeful. Not through aggressive visualization, but through a quiet, persistent knowing. His body language began to change. His conversations carried a different weight. The very frequency of his presence shifted. Remarkably, without dramatically altering his external routine. Silas watched as his circumstances began to rearrange themselves. Unexpected phone calls, subtle professional introductions, minor synchronicities. The universe seemed to be constructing a pathway that aligned with his internal state. Both Lucille and Silas were living demonstrations of a profound metaphysical truth. Identity is the primary edit. The external world is not a fixed system, but a responsive field that continuously realigns itself to match one's dominant internal frequency. Their experiences revealed that transformation is not about doing more, but about being more. It's about stepping into the version of oneself that already exists in potential, waiting to be activated. Practice. Craft an identity embodiment ritual. Select a quiet, private space where you can be undisturbed. Create a sacred container for your transformation by clearing the energy of the room and setting a clear intention. Chapter 14. The Ritual of Revision. Helen Cartwright sat in her sunlit study, her hands trembling slightly as she held an old photograph. The image captured a moment from her childhood, a scene that had haunted her for decades. Most would see an ordinary family snapshot, but Helen saw the precise instant where her sense of worth had been fractured. The memory was etched with painful precision, her father's dismissive gesture, the sharp words that cut deeper than any physical wound. For years, Helen had carried this moment like a hidden wound, allowing it to shape her understanding of herself and her potential. But something had changed. Through her recent studies of metaphysical editing, Helen understood that memories were not fixed recordings, but malleable experiences that could be reinterpreted, reimagined, and ultimately transformed. She closed her eyes and began to see the memory differently. Instead of a moment of rejection, she now witnessed her father's own pain, his limitations, his struggle. The narrative shifted from personal inadequacy to understanding. The emotional charge that had defined her for decades began to dissolve. Across town, Walter Monroe was experiencing a similar transformation. A memory of professional failure that had haunted him for years suddenly appeared in a new light. Where he once saw a devastating career setback, he now recognized a crucial learning moment, a redirection rather than a rejection. Walter's revised memory didn't just change his emotional landscape, it opened unexpected professional opportunities. Conversations that were once tinged with hesitation now carried confidence. Potential collaborators sensed something different in his energy, a man who had made peace with his past. Helen and Walter were living proof of a profound metaphysical principle. The past is not a fixed narrative, but a flexible story waiting to be rewritten. Each memory carries an emotional frequency that can be deliberately shifted, creating ripple effects throughout one's entire life experience. Their experiences demonstrated that emotional revision is not about denying what happened, but about transforming its meaning. By changing the internal interpretation, they were effectively rewriting their personal histories. Practice. Perform a revision on one moment. Select a memory that still carries emotional weight. Find a quiet space where you can be undisturbed. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Revisit the memory, but this time, observe it with compassion and new understanding. Imagine viewing the scene from a place of wisdom, seeing the broader context, the human complexity behind the moment. Allow yourself to feel the emotional shift as you reinterpret the memory's significance. Chapter 15. Symbols and Archetypes. In the quiet suburbs of Millbrook, Rosemary Dalton's nights were haunted by a recurring dream. Each evening she found herself standing before an ancient oak tree, its branches twisting like intricate neural pathways against a moonlit sky. At the tree's base, a silver key lay partially buried in moss-covered roots, always just beyond her reach. Edgar Rowe, a retired professor of comparative mythology, understood the language of symbols better than most. He had spent decades studying how archetypal images could unlock the deepest chambers of human consciousness. When Rosemary consulted him about her persistent dream, he recognized something profound in her description. Dreams are not random, Edgar explained, his weathered hands tracing an invisible map in the air. They are messages from the subconscious, encoded in the universal language of symbolism. The oak represents strength and hidden potential. The silver key suggests a locked aspect of yourself waiting to be discovered. Rosemary's dream was more than a nightly occurrence. It was a metaphysical communication. The oak tree symbolized her unexpressed potential, while the silver key represented the dormant abilities she had yet to unlock. Each element was precisely positioned to reveal her internal landscape. As Edgar guided Rosemary through the dream's symbolic terrain, she began to understand the deeper communication. The tree's roots represented her foundational beliefs, the branches her potential pathways of growth. The silver key was her own capacity for transformation, perpetually present, but not yet fully claimed. Symbols, Edgar explained, speak directly to the subconscious mind. They bypass rational thought, communicating complex truths through simple, archetypal imagery. A symbol could shift internal states more powerfully than 1,000 rational arguments, creating instantaneous transformations in consciousness. Rosemary's dream was an invitation, a symbolic prompt from her deeper self, urging her to recognize her own untapped potential. The recurring nature of the dream suggested an urgent message. Something within her was ready to be acknowledged, to be unlocked. Edgar shared his own experience with archetypal engagement. By consciously working with symbolic representations, he had navigated significant life transitions. Symbols were not passive images, but active agents of transformation, capable of reshaping internal narratives and external realities. Practice. Choose a symbol, representing your chosen timeline. Close your eyes and allow an image to emerge that represents the timeline you wish to inhabit. This symbol should resonate with your desired state of being. It might be an object, a landscape, or an abstract form. Once identified, hold the symbol in your awareness, allowing its essence to communicate with your subconscious mind. Chapter 16. Wealth Rewritten. In the quiet suburban landscape of Oak Ridge, Agnes Willoughby discovered her family's financial legacy was more than just a collection of bank statements. It was a carefully woven tapestry of inherited scarcity beliefs. Her grandmother's whispered warnings about money, her father's constant anxiety about expenses, and her mother's perpetual frugality had created an invisible emotional inheritance that ran deeper than any monetary transaction. Agnes traced her family's financial history, like a detective unraveling a complex mystery. Every hushed conversation about being just getting by, every cautious approach to spending, had created an energetic blueprint of lack that had silently programmed her relationship with wealth. At 52, Agnes realized her entire relationship with money was a script written generations ago. Her family's economic narrative had become her own unconscious programming, a system of beliefs that acted like an invisible fence, constraining her financial potential. Across town, Chester Doyle embodied a radically different approach. Where Agnes saw limitations, Chester saw possibilities. He understood that wealth was not an external condition, but an internal state of being. His transformation began the moment he decided to become the version of himself who naturally expected abundance. Chester's wealth consciousness wasn't about magical thinking or wishful dreams. It was a deliberate reconstruction of his inner financial identity. He studied successful individuals, not for their strategies, but for their fundamental relationship with money, how they thought, felt, and carried themselves in the world of finance. The shift was subtle, yet profound. Chester stopped describing himself as someone struggling and started embodying someone who was naturally aligned with prosperity. His language changed. His posture shifted. He began to see opportunities where he once saw obstacles. Agnes watched Chester's transformation with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. His ease with financial conversations, his calm approach to investments, and his fundamental belief in his own worth challenged everything she had been taught about money. Slowly, Agnes began to understand that her family's scarcity narrative was just that, a narrative. It was not an immutable truth, but a learned perspective that could be rewritten. Money, she realized, was not an external force acting upon her, but an energy that responded to her internal state. Practice. Replace. One poverty belief with a wealth code. Identify a deeply held belief about money that limits your potential. Write it down, then consciously craft a new statement that represents abundance and possibility. Repeat this new belief, allowing it to replace the old narrative of lack. Chapter 17. Love, Rewritten. In the soft light of a late autumn afternoon, Florence Ashbury sat by her kitchen window, tracing the rim of her teacup with a contemplative finger. Her relationship history read like a catalogue of compromise, each partner a reflection of the unworthiness she carried deep within her core. Howard Pennington lived across town, a man whose romantic journey had been equally complex. He had spent years believing he was undeserving of genuine love, a belief that manifested in relationships that were perpetually conditional and emotionally distant. Florence's pattern was unmistakable. She consistently attracted partners who confirmed her deepest fears about herself, men who were unavailable, critical, or emotionally disconnected. Each relationship was a mirror, reflecting back the exact narrative she unconsciously believed about her own value. Howard's transformation began when he realized his inner dialogue about worthiness was the true architect of his romantic experiences. He had spent decades believing he was fundamentally unlovable, a belief that had shaped every romantic interaction he'd ever experienced. The moment Howard shifted his internal narrative, something profound happened. He began to see himself as inherently worthy of genuine, unconditional love. This wasn't about affirmations or positive thinking, but a fundamental reconstruction of his self-perception. Florence's breakthrough came through a similar journey of self-discovery. She started to recognize that her relationships were not happening to her, but were direct manifestations of her internal landscape. Each partner she attracted was responding to her unconscious beliefs about love, intimacy, and personal worth. Their stories intersected not through direct connection, but through the universal principle that relationships are living reflections of one's internal state. Love, they both discovered, was not something that happened by chance, but a dynamic interaction guided by deeply held beliefs about self-worth and connection. The universe, they learned, was listening intently to their inner narratives, constantly arranging experiences that matched their most fundamental beliefs about themselves and love. Practice. Rescript one belief about love. Take a moment to identify a deeply held belief about love that has limited your romantic experiences. Write this belief down, then consciously craft a new narrative that represents your highest vision of loving and being loved. Allow this new script to replace the old. Pattern. Creating space for transformative romantic experiences. Chapter 18. Health, Rewritten. In the quiet suburb of Millbrook, Mildred Sawyer stood before her bathroom mirror, studying the lines of tension etched across her shoulders. For years, she had carried her unprocessed emotions like a physical armor, each worry, each suppressed feeling manifesting as a knot of pain between her shoulder blades. Albert Givens lived across town, battling a chronic condition that doctors couldn't fully explain. His body had become a silent messenger, communicating years of unexpressed grief and unresolved emotional patterns through persistent physical symptoms. Mildred's journey of understanding began when she realized her body was more than a mere vessel. It was a living manuscript, recording every unspoken emotion, every internalized stress. The chronic neck pain she'd endured for decades wasn't a random affliction, but a precise language of her inner state. Her physical tension told a story of years of self-suppression, expectations of perfection, unexpressed disappointments, and generations of familial emotional patterns had taken residence in her muscles, creating a landscape of restricted movement and persistent discomfort. Albert's experience mirrored this profound connection. His recurring respiratory issues and unexplained muscle weakness were not random medical mysteries, but direct translations of his inner emotional landscape. Years of holding back, of maintaining a stoic exterior while suppressing deep-seated emotions, had literally contracted his physical form. As Mildred began to understand this intricate connection, she recognized that her body was not just responding to physical stimuli, but was a dynamic, responsive system deeply interconnected with her consciousness. Each muscle tension, each area of discomfort, was a precise communication from her deeper self. The body, she discovered, was not a passive object, but an intelligent system, constantly translating emotional states into physical experiences. Unresolved emotions didn't simply disappear. They were stored, remembered, and expressed through physical sensations. Albert's healing began when he started to view his physical symptoms as messages rather than problems to be eliminated. By listening to his body's language, by allowing himself to feel and release long-held emotional patterns, he discovered a path to profound physical transformation. Their individual journeys converged on a universal truth. Consciousness creates physical reality. The body was not separate from emotional experience, but its most intimate expression. Practice. Perform a body-affirming visualization. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Imagine a warm, healing light entering your body, gently dissolving any areas of tension. Visualize each cell receiving nurturing energy, releasing old patterns and welcoming complete wellness. Breathe into any areas of discomfort, sending them compassion and understanding. Chapter 19. Omens and Synchronicities. In the quiet town of Riverdale, Opal Jennings experienced a profound shift in her understanding of the universe's communicative nature. Her journey of alignment had begun subtly, with small nudges and whispers from the cosmic field. But now those signals were becoming impossible to ignore. Clifton Moore, a retired mathematics teacher living 2 streets over, had recently undergone his own transformation of belief. Where he once saw the world as a series of random, disconnected events, he now understood that every occurrence was a potential message, a breadcrumb of cosmic communication. Opal's synchronicities began to multiply with remarkable intensity. What had started as occasional coincidences now became a daily symphony of meaningful connections. A book she had been thinking about would mysteriously appear on a friend's coffee table. Phone calls would come from people she had just been contemplating. Street signs seemed to respond directly to her inner thoughts, their messages perfectly timed and uncannily relevant. Her alignment with the universal field was deepening, and the field was responding with increasing clarity. Where once she might have dismissed these occurrences as mere chance, Opal now recognized them as deliberate communications, a language spoken in signs, symbols, and seemingly random events. Clifton's experience mirrored hers, though from a different perspective. After adopting a new belief about abundance and possibility, he noticed immediate and precise responses from the universe. A financial concern he had been mulling over would be resolved through an unexpected opportunity. A question in his mind would be answered by a stranger's conversation overheard in a cafe. The universe, they were learning, was not a silent, indifferent expanse, but an intelligent, responsive system constantly providing feedback. Every synchronicity was a form of communication, a subtle confirmation that their inner world was actively shaping their external reality. Opal realized that these signs were not random, but carefully orchestrated messages. They were confirmations of her alignment, gentle nudges validating her internal shifts, and invitations to pay closer attention to the intricate dialogue between consciousness and manifestation. Clifton understood that these synchronicities were not mere coincidences, but precise responses to his evolving belief system. Each sign was a confirmation, a whisper from the universe saying, "Yes, you are on the right path." Practice. Track your synchronicities today. Take a moment to observe the subtle signs around you. Notice coincidences, unexpected connections, and seemingly random events. Write them down. Pay attention to the moments when your thoughts seem to materialize or when unexpected solutions appear. These are the universe's way of communicating with you. Chapter 20. Doubt, delay, and the illusion of no movement. In the quiet suburbs of Millbrook, Beatrice Langford stood at her kitchen window, a sense of stagnation weighing heavily on her shoulders. From the outside, her life appeared unchanged. The same modest house, the same routine, the same seemingly immovable circumstances. Yet something profound was stirring beneath the surface, invisible to the naked eye but palpable to her growing intuition. Gerald Whitlow, her neighbor and longtime acquaintance, understood this phenomenon intimately. He had spent years working on a complex engineering project that seemed perpetually stuck, with progress so microscopic it was nearly imperceptible. To an outside observer, nothing appeared to be happening. But Gerald knew better. The universe, they were learning, operates in mysterious rhythms. What looks like delay is often a complex behind-the-scenes rearrangement, a silent reorganization of circumstances, connections, and potential pathways. Beatrice's feeling of being stuck was not a permanent state, but a chrysalis, moment of transformation. Gerald's own experience had taught him that persistence was the key to breakthrough. His years of consistent work on his project had seemed futile, with no visible progress. Colleagues had suggested he abandon his research, but something inside him knew differently. And then, almost overnight, multiple breakthrough discoveries converged, rendering years of seemingly slow work suddenly significant. Doubt, they both realized, was merely a misinterpretation of timing. What appeared to be resistance was actually preparation. The universe was not ignoring their desires. It was meticulously aligning conditions, gathering resources, and creating the precise energetic environment for manifestation. Beatrice reflected on her own journey. Her dreams had not disappeared. They were simply gestating. Each moment of apparent stillness was actually a moment of potential energy building, like a compressed spring waiting to be released. Her job was not to force movement, but to maintain her inner alignment and trust the process. Gerald's project had emerged from years of what seemed like stagnation, a testament to the unseen work happening beneath the surface. His breakthrough came not from aggressive pushing, but from steady, committed engagement with his vision. Practice. Stabilize one desire through steady assumption. Choose one specific desire and commit to holding its reality internally, regardless of external evidence. Cultivate an unwavering inner posture of already having achieved this desire. Maintain this assumption consistently, not through forceful affirmation, but through a calm, unshakable knowing. Let your internal state remain steady, trusting that the external world will inevitably align with your persistent inner narrative. Part 3. Mastery of the Forbidden. 33rd Degree. Chapter 21. Living as the Apex Metaphysician. In the tranquil suburbs of Oak Ridge, Harriet Coleman moved through her days with a quiet, almost imperceptible power. Her movements were deliberate, her presence a subtle but profound energy that seemed to reshape the space around her. Unlike those who chased external validation or frantically sought transformation, Harriet embodied mastery as a living, breathing state of being. Russell Davenport had first noticed this quality during a community workshop where Harriet spoke about metaphysical principles. She didn't lecture or persuade. She simply existed in a state of complete certainty that seemed to bend reality's edges. Her words carried weight, not because she tried to convince anyone, but because her entire being radiated an unshakable understanding. Russell had been struggling with persistent professional challenges, a career that felt stuck, opportunities that seemed perpetually out of reach. He had tried countless strategies, networking, additional training, aggressive marketing of his skills. Yet nothing shifted until he began to understand the principle of embodied mastery that Harriet demonstrated. Gradually, Russell started to inhabit the identity of the professional he desired to become, not through aggressive affirmations or forced behaviors, but through a deep, internal knowing. He began to carry himself differently, not with arrogance, but with a quiet confidence that seemed to recalibrate his professional environment. Colleagues started responding to him differently. Opportunities that had previously been invisible now seemed to emerge naturally. Clients who once overlooked him now sought his expertise. Russell realized that mastery wasn't something to be acquired, but a state to be lived. Harriet's teachings resonated deeply. True transformation happens not through external manipulation, but through a fundamental shift in one's internal state. Mastery was not about achieving something, but about becoming something. It was an identity so profound that it naturally restructured external circumstances. As Russell continued to embody this principle, he noticed how his environment began to align with his new internal frequency. Doors opened, conversations shifted, opportunities emerged not through struggle, but through an almost magnetic attraction. Practice. Define your apex traits. Take a moment of quiet reflection. Identify the 3 to 5 core traits that represent your highest, most authentic self. These are not aspirational characteristics, but the deepest expressions of who you are when you are most aligned. Write these traits as powerful present-tense statements. For example, I am unwavering in my integrity, or I move through the world with graceful confidence. These are not descriptions, but declarations of your essential nature. Sit with these traits. Feel them permeate your being. Allow them to become the lens through which you interpret and interact with your world. Chapter 22. Consecrated Speech. In the quiet town of Millbrook, Ida Mayfield discovered a profound truth about the power of words. Her life had been a tapestry of unconscious declarations, each utterance subtly weaving the fabric of her reality. As a high school English teacher, Ida had always been passionate about language, but she was about to learn that words were far more than mere communication. They were metaphysical instruments of creation. Wesley Thornton, a local insurance agent, sat across from her at the town's small cafe, listening intently as Ida shared her recent revelations. He had witnessed firsthand the transformative power of carefully chosen speech, having recently experienced a dramatic shift in his own life trajectory. For years, Wesley had unconsciously spoken about his career with resignation. "Insurance is a tough business," he would say. "It's hard to make real money." These words, repeated like a mantra, had become self-fulfilling prophecies. His income remained stagnant, his opportunities limited. Everything changed when Wesley began to understand the metaphysical nature of language. He started to reframe his verbal landscape, replacing statements of limitation with declarations of possibility. "My work is a channel for abundance," he began to say. "Every interaction is an opportunity for growth and prosperity. The shift was subtle but profound. His conversations with clients transformed. Where he once sounded tentative, he now spoke with quiet confidence. His income began to expand, not through aggressive tactics, but through a fundamental realignment of his verbal energy. Ida nodded as Wesley shared his experience. She understood intimately how words were more than sound. They were vibrational stamps that sealed assumptions into reality. In her classroom, she had observed how students' self-talk directly influenced their academic performance and personal potential. Words are not just descriptors, Ida would explain to Wesley. They are active participants in creating our experience. Each statement is a metaphysical contract with the universe, declaring what we believe is possible. Her own journey had been a testament to this principle. Where she once spoke from a place of doubt and hesitation, she now crafted her language with intention. Each word became a deliberate brushstroke, painting the reality she wished to inhabit. Wesley leaned forward, captivated by the depth of Ida's understanding. He recognized that true mastery wasn't about controlling external circumstances, but about becoming conscious architects of their inner dialogue. Practice. Create a daily verbal seal. Choose 3 powerful statements that represent your highest intention. These are not wishes, but declarations of your current state of being. Speak them aloud each morning, feeling the vibration of each word. Let these verbal seals become the energetic blueprint through which your day unfolds. Speak them with conviction, as though the universe itself is listening and responding to your precise frequency. Chapter 23. Invisible Influence and the Collective Field. In the bustling community center of Riverdale, Eunice Harper sat quietly among a group of community volunteers, engaged in a heated discussion about neighborhood development. The meeting had been escalating, with tensions rising and voices growing increasingly sharp and defensive. Thaddeus Crane, the project coordinator, watched the room's dynamic with growing concern. Arguments pinged back and forth like aggressive ping-pong balls, each participant trying to assert their perspective more forcefully than the last. Eunice, a retired social worker with decades of community experience, remained remarkably still. Her breathing was measured, her posture relaxed. Unlike the others, she radiated an inexplicable sense of calm that seemed to subtly influence the room's energetic landscape. As the arguments continued, something remarkable began to happen. The volunteers' tones gradually softened. Their gestures became less aggressive. Without Eunice saying a word, the conversation began to shift towards collaborative problem-solving. Thaddeus observed this transformation with fascination. He recognized the phenomenon from his own experiences, that an individual's internal state could profoundly impact collective energy. His own practice of maintaining inner certainty had taught him that external environments were responsive to one's private frequency. The meeting, which had been on the brink of complete breakdown, now moved towards constructive dialogue. Ideas were being exchanged, compromises proposed. The room's temperature, both literal and metaphorical, had transformed. Eunice simply continued to breathe, her presence a living demonstration of how inner coherence could reshape external circumstances without force or manipulation. Practice. Project coherence into your environment. Select a challenging environment where tension exists. Before entering, center yourself through deep, intentional breathing. Establish a clear internal state of calm, compassion, and clarity. As you move through the space, maintain this inner equilibrium. Observe how your steady frequency begins to influence the surrounding dynamics without any direct intervention. Chapter 24. Initiations and threshold. Guardians. Mabel Aldridge stood at the precipice of her most significant personal transformation. After months of intense inner work and metaphysical study, she had finally break through her long-standing limiting beliefs about professional success. Her consulting business was beginning to flourish, attracting clients who resonated with her newfound energy and clarity. But the universe, as always, had its own curriculum of growth. Within weeks of her breakthrough, a series of unexpected challenges emerged. A major client unexpectedly cancelled a lucrative contract. Her primary business software experienced a catastrophic failure, threatening to disrupt her entire operational workflow. Simultaneously, a professional rival began spreading subtle rumors that challenged her professional reputation. Where once these events would have devastated her, Mabel now recognized them differently. These were not obstacles, but confirmations. Each challenge was a test of her new energetic embodiment, a verification that her internal shifts were genuine and profound. Jerome Whitaker understood this principle intimately. A young entrepreneur who had recently transformed his relationship with abundance, he viewed challenges as sacred initiations. When a significant investment opportunity seemed to momentarily collapse, Jerome remained calm. He understood that this was not a setback, but a test of his new timeline's integrity. By maintaining his internal state of confidence and possibility, Jerome discovered that the investment not only recovered, but expanded beyond his original expectations. The temporary friction was merely the universe's method of confirming his energetic alignment. Mabel approached her challenges with similar perspective. She did not fight the disruptions, but instead remained centered, treating each challenge as an opportunity to demonstrate her newfound resilience. Her response, calm, strategic, and unattached, was fundamentally different from her previous reactive patterns. The challenges were not punishments, but invitations. Invitations to prove that her internal transformation was not just theoretical, but a lived reality. Practice. Identify your current initiation. Reflect on the challenges currently present in your life. Instead of viewing them as random obstacles, consider them as precise tests designed to confirm your growth. What specific internal state are these challenges asking you to embody? What would maintaining your highest self look like in the face of these trials? Write down one challenge and describe how you will move through it with grace, confidence, and unwavering inner stability. Chapter 25. Walking Through the Valley. Frances Doyle sat in her dimly lit living room, an unexpected weight pressing against her chest. For weeks, she had been experiencing a profound emotional heaviness that seemed to penetrate every aspect of her being. Her usual optimism felt distant, replaced by a thick fog of uncertainty and melancholy. What Frances didn't yet understand was that this emotional landscape represented something far more significant than mere depression. She was witnessing the dissolution of her old identity, a profound metamorphosis happening beneath the surface of her conscious awareness. Norman Fletcher, a seasoned metaphysical practitioner, recognized these moments intimately. He understood that such emotional valleys were not signs of failure, but sacred thresholds of transformation. The darkness was not a punishment, but a necessary stage of quantum shifting, a period where the old self was being dismantled to make way for a more authentic expression. Frances found herself crying without clear reason, feeling exhausted by emotions that seemed to have no specific origin. Her usual coping mechanisms felt ineffective. Meditation, which once brought her clarity, now seemed to amplify the internal turbulence. Norman would have smiled knowingly. He knew that these moments of apparent darkness were actually evidence of profound internal recalibration. The emotional heaviness was not a problem to be solved, but a process to be witnessed. In these valleys of transformation, steadiness became the most powerful practice. Not a forced steadiness of suppression, but a gentle, compassionate presence that allowed the emotional alchemy to unfold naturally. Francis's inner landscape was shifting at a cellular level. The emotional weight was releasing years of accumulated limiting beliefs, outdated protective mechanisms, and inherited narratives that no longer served her evolutionary path. Norman often shared with his students that these dark nights were not endpoints, but crucial transitional spaces. They were quantum portals where old identities dissolve and new potentials emerge, if one could maintain enough presence to allow the process. As Francis sat in her emotional intensity, something within her was quietly reorganizing. The heaviness was not her enemy, but a messenger, signaling the profound internal work of personal transformation. Practice. Ground yourself during emotional turbulence. Find a quiet space. Breathe deeply. Place your hands on your heart. Acknowledge the emotions moving through you without judgment. Whisper to yourself, "I am safe. I am transforming. These feelings are passing through me, not defining me." Breathe into any sensations of heaviness, offering them compassionate presence. Chapter 26. Sacred Stillness and the Zero Point. In the quiet corners of her meticulously arranged study, Sylvia Tanner discovered something profound about the nature of creation itself. For years, she had chased her desires with relentless action, believing that effort was the key to manifestation. But today, something shifted fundamentally in her understanding. Leonard Price, her mentor in metaphysical studies, had often spoken about the power of zero-point stillness, a state of absolute receptivity where the noise of constant doing dissolved and pure potential could emerge. Sylvia had intellectually understood the concept, but today she was experiencing it viscerally. Her breath became slow and deliberate. The books around her seemed to fade into the background, and a profound silence began to fill the room. It was more than mere quiet. It was a receptive emptiness that hummed with unmanifested potential. Leonard had once described this state as the quantum field, a realm of pure possibility where creation waited to be called forth. Unlike her previous approaches of forcing outcomes, this stillness was an invitation. She was not trying to make something happen. She was allowing something to emerge. In this zero-point state, Sylvia noticed how her previous strategies of constant effort had actually been barriers to true manifestation. The harder she had pushed, the more resistance she had created. Now, in this exquisite stillness, she could feel the subtle vibrations of potential waiting to take form. Her mind, typically a whirlwind of plans and strategies, became a clear, smooth surface. Thoughts would arise and then dissolve without her engaging them. She was becoming a vessel, open, receptive, neutral. Leonard often shared that obstacles were not external challenges to be battled, but manifestations of internal tensions. In this deep stillness, those tensions began to dissolve. Where there had been struggle, now there was spaciousness. Where there had been complexity, now there was simplicity. The room seemed to breathe with her. Each exhale released another layer of her habitual doing mode. Each inhale welcomed a new understanding of creation, not as something to be manufactured, but as something waiting to be received. Sylvia was experiencing what Leonard called the birthplace of manifestation, a state so profound that it transcended individual will and merged with a larger, intelligent field of potential. Practice. 0-point stillness ritual. Find a quiet space. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes. Take 3 deep breaths. Allow your attention to rest in the space between breaths, the momentary pause where nothing moves. Breathe without agenda. Be completely receptive. Notice the stillness beneath your thoughts. Remain here for 5 to 10 minutes, experiencing pure, undirected awareness. Chapter 27. Everyday Miracles. Pearl Kingston's world had been subtly transforming, though she hadn't immediately recognized the profound shift happening around her. What began as coincidental moments gradually became a tapestry of continuous wonder. Small miracles started appearing with such regularity that they began to feel less like extraordinary events and more like the natural rhythm of her existence. A dropped letter that accidentally revealed a long-lost connection. A chance encounter with an old friend who held the exact solution to a problem she'd been contemplating. Parking spaces materializing precisely when needed. Phone calls arriving from people she'd just been thinking about. These weren't random occurrences, but manifestations of a deeper alignment. Her friend Harlan Briggs had spoken about this phenomenon extensively. Synchronicity, he explained, was not a rare magical intervention, but the natural state of a universe responsive to inner coherence. As individuals aligned their inner frequency with their truest desires, the external world began to dance in perfect synchronization. Pearl noticed how her expectations had transformed. Where she once anticipated complications, she now approached situations with a quiet expectancy of flow. Her inner state had become a magnet for harmonious experiences. The miracles weren't happening to her. They were happening through her. The coffee shop barista, knowing her order before, she spoke. The unexpected refund that arrived just when she needed extra funds. A random conversation that provided precisely the insight she'd been seeking. These moments were becoming so consistent that Pearl began to understand them not as exceptions, but as the standard operating system of a universe designed to support conscious creators. Harlan would often remind her that miracles were not supernatural interventions, but the natural consequence of precise inner alignment. When one's internal state was clear, coherent, and confident, the external world could not help but respond in kind. Pearl's perception was shifting. What once seemed magical now felt utterly normal. Synchronicities were no longer surprising. They were expected. Her alignment was creating a field of possibility where previously invisible connections became apparent, where opportunities emerged effortlessly. She was learning that magic wasn't about forcing external circumstances, but about creating an internal environment so resonant that the universe could not help but reflect her inner state. Practice. Record 3 miracles today. Take a journal. Throughout the day, document 3 seemingly small, yet meaningful synchronicities or unexpected positive occurrences. These could be chance encounters, unexpected solutions, serendipitous moments, or subtle alignments that feel like more than mere coincidence. Observe and record without judgment, simply witnessing the magic unfolding around you. Chapter 28. Legacy Timelines. Cora Ellsworth stood at the family gathering, her presence subtly different from years past. The generational patterns that had long defined her family, a complex tapestry of unspoken tensions, inherited limitations, and repeated struggles, seemed to shimmer around her with a newfound transparency. Her grandmother had been a woman of quiet resignation, her mother a bearer of unresolved emotional wounds, and Cora had once been their faithful echo. But something had changed. Through years of inner work, she had begun to understand that family narratives were not immutable contracts, but drafts waiting to be rewritten. The family dynamics had always been a delicate ecosystem of unresolved traumas, financial struggles, communication breakdowns, and a pervasive sense of limitation had been passed down like heirlooms. Cora recognized these patterns not as fate, but as learned scripts that could be deliberately edited. Her transformation wasn't about rejecting her lineage, but about consciously selecting which threads to carry forward. She had spent years tracing the emotional genealogy of her family, understanding how beliefs and emotional frequencies were transmitted across generations like silent instructions. Everett Dunham, a distant cousin who had also embarked on a similar journey of self-discovery, observed similar shifts in his own family landscape. His internal work had created unexpected ripples. Where previous generations had been marked by conflict and disconnection, subtle changes in his own energy began to transform family interactions. Cora understood now that her inner work was not just personal. It was a form of ancestral healing. Each belief she transformed, each emotional pattern she consciously revised, sent new instructions through the invisible family network. Her healing didn't just affect her own timeline. It created new possibilities for those who came before and after her. The room felt different. Conversations that might have previously descended into old patterns now carried a new lightness. Unspoken tensions seemed to dissolve. Her family members, often unconsciously trapped in generational scripts, now moved with a slightly different energy. Practice. Choose your lineage timeline. Sit quietly and reflect on your family history. Identify one generational pattern, whether related to relationships, finances, health, or emotional responses, that you wish to transform. Visualize yourself as the point of intervention, consciously selecting which aspects of your lineage you will carry forward and which you will deliberately release. Chapter 29. The irreversible edit. Winifred Clark stood at the threshold of transformation, her old self dissolving like mist under the morning sun. The woman she had been, cautious, apologetic, perpetually waiting for permission, was becoming transparent, losing substance with each conscious breath. Years of incremental shifts had led to this moment. Small choices, repeated inner dialogues, and deliberate emotional recalibrations had accumulated, creating a critical mass of change. Winifred understood now that transformation wasn't a sudden event, but a gradual crystallization of identity. Her hands, once trembling with uncertainty, now rested with quiet confidence. The mirror reflected not just her physical form, but a profound energetic shift. She had moved beyond conceptual understanding into pure embodiment. Douglas Henshaw experienced a similar phenomenon in his own life. Where uncertainty had once ruled his decisions, a decisive inner alignment now governed his actions. His timeline wasn't just changing, it was being permanently sealed through unwavering conviction. For Winifred, the irreversible edit manifested as a complete internal reorganization. The fears that had previously defined her boundaries began to lose their grip. Her nervous system, once wired for survival and contraction, now vibrated with an expansive, assured frequency. She recognized this wasn't about forcing change, but allowing a deeper truth to emerge. The old identity didn't fight or resist. It simply understood its time had passed. Like a snake shedding its skin, Winifred was releasing a limiting narrative that no longer served her evolutionary trajectory. The universe responded subtly but definitively. Opportunities that would have seemed impossible before now aligned naturally. Relationships recalibrated, professional dynamics shifted, not through external manipulation, but through the pure resonance of her transformed internal state. Douglas observed similar phenomena. His decisive inner shift wasn't just a mental construct. It was a complete recalibration of his energetic blueprint. The timeline he had chosen began manifesting with an almost inevitable precision. Practice. Declare. 1 irreversible edit. Chapter 30. Becoming the living manuscript. In the quiet dawn of her transformed consciousness, Beatrice Monroe stood as a living testament to the metaphysical principles she had once merely studied. Where she once intellectualized spiritual laws, she now radiated them effortlessly. Her very presence had become a transmission of understanding, her body and being a conduit of the principles she had long explored. The books that once lined her shelves, filled with complex theories and intricate explanations, now seemed like distant maps to a territory she now inhabited. Beatrice had transcended intellectual knowing into a state of pure embodiment. Her movements, her responses, her very breath carried the subtle energy of someone who no longer sought to understand the universe. She was the universe, experiencing itself. Nathaniel Brooks experienced a similar profound shift. His presence alone seemed to create a field of transformation. When he entered a room, conversations would naturally realign, tensions would dissolve, and people would find themselves unexpectedly inspired. This wasn't through conscious effort or manipulation, but through the pure frequency of his inner state. Mastery, they both understood, was not about technique or strategic application. It was about becoming so aligned with universal principles that manifestation occurred as a natural extension of one's being. The laws of reality were no longer external concepts to be studied, but internal rhythms to be lived. Beatrice noticed how her environment responded to her internal state with increasing precision. What once required elaborate visualization and emotional management now happened spontaneously. Her thoughts would crystallize into experience with an almost instantaneous fluidity. Nathaniel's experience mirrored this understanding. His intentionality had become so refined that action was no longer required. Presence alone was sufficient. Where he once believed he needed to do something to create change, he now recognized that being was the most powerful form of doing. They had both arrived at a crucial understanding. Metaphysical mastery was not about controlling external circumstances, but about embodying such profound inner alignment that the external world naturally conformed to their state of being. Practice. Write a personal declaration of metaphysical mastery. Conclusion. In the weeks following her profound transformation, Beatrice Monroe observed how her newfound understanding began to manifest in subtle yet profound ways. The manuscript of her life was no longer a rigid document, but a living, breathing entity responsive to her innermost convictions. Her colleagues at the university noticed a shift in her demeanor. Where she once approached academic research with rigid methodological constraints, she now moved with a fluid intelligence that seemed to transcend traditional academic boundaries. Her lectures became less about presenting fixed information and more about inviting students into a dynamic exploration of consciousness. Nathaniel Brooks experienced similar transformations in his professional landscape. As a consultant who previously relied on strategic frameworks, he now found that his intuitive guidance emerged more naturally. Clients would seek him out not for his technical expertise, but for the transformative energy he carried. The editing principle had become more than a theoretical concept. It was now their lived reality. They understood that every moment represented an opportunity to rewrite internal narratives, to reassign meaning, and to calibrate emotional frequencies. Their external worlds increasingly reflected this internal mastery. Beatrice recognized that the great mind, that infinite responsive intelligence, was constantly translating her inner state into external experience. Her assumptions were no longer passive observations, but active instructions to the universal field. Each thought, each emotional nuance became a precise communication, sculpting her reality with unprecedented clarity. Nathaniel observed how his intentionality had become a form of silent communication. Where he once believed change required elaborate action, he now understood that profound shifts occurred through refined inner alignment. His presence alone seemed to recalibrate environments, not through force, but through harmonization. Their journeys exemplified a fundamental truth. Reality was not something that happened to them, but something continuously generated from within. The manual they had studied was not a conclusion, but an invitation, a doorway into a more expansive understanding of personal authorship. As they continued their individual paths, they carried with them the profound knowing that every moment was a new line waiting to be written, every assumption a brushstroke on the canvas of destiny. Fate was not fixed, but fluid, not imposed, but chosen. The editing principle had become their compass, guiding them to understand that reality reflects the identity they inhabited, the meaning they assigned, and the emotional frequency they embodied. They walked forward, continuing to write the manuscript of their existence with clarity, intention, and reverence, knowing the great mind would respond faithfully to their inner edits.
If you enjoyed this exclusive audiobook, I handpicked this next book which will change your life.